Afternoon. Right.
Time's up.
Yeah. You joke now, you'll be wishing that went on. Right, so good afternoon. I'm going to sort of split the talk in half a little bit because doing too much on commercial property valuation in the time allocated is nigh on impossible. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a taster, and then at the end of the presentation, I'm going to sort of show you. Here's one I did earlier, which will hopefully get you creative juices flowing and sort of show you how you can add value if you are thinking of doing commercial property. The property I'm talking about is an industrial property that I own, but the premise is applicable to retail or offices equally, so that it's not just applicable to industrial. So, quick one slide about myself. I went to Sheffield Hallam University to do what was called then Business Property Management. It is now called Real Estate. It was a surveying degree, so I haven't done like a business degree or anything like that. Qualified as a chartered surveyor in 2010. I then went on to do an arbitration qualification. So an arbitrator, for people who don't know, most people don't. Most people have heard of adjudicators in a construction sense. Most people have heard of adjudicators. Most people have heard of judges. Arbitrators sit in the middle of those two in sort of hierarchy of professionalism and qualifications, etc. So I do dispute resolution, predominantly to do with commercial rents. So people come to me and say, right, we have a dispute, we want you to solve that dispute for us, and what I say goes. So I tell them absolutely what the rent is going to be. So I sit on the RICS President's Panel for Rent Review and Lease Renewal Arbitrators, and I also sit as an assessor for new surveyors looking to become chartered. And that's technically called the APC, Assessment for Professional Competence, similar to the LPC for solicitors. So that's me. So, straight into it then. What is market value? Anybody? Answers from the floor.
Price that the market will pay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll pay for it.
Any given time, arm's length.
Arm's length, yeah, that's a good one, yeah. Any more? Anyone think they might have started? Does anyone know that there even is an official definition for market value from the RICS? Does anyone know that even exists? No. Excellent. That's what we pay our professional fees for to make sure the RICS disseminates this information to the public in their role of... Right. Market value definition. So this is the official RICS definition. The estimated amount for which an asset or liability should exchange on the valuation date between a willing buyer and a willing seller in an arm's length transaction, well done, after proper marketing where the parties each acted knowledgeably, prudently and without compulsion. Now, I'm not going to do it today because of sort of time implications and what have you. However, the RICS Red Book, anyone heard of that? Yeah. Okay. Excellent. That is for those who haven't, or those who may not be overly familiar with it. The RICS Red Book is the valuer's Bible, effectively. Now, it doesn't tell you how to value property. Okay, that's the first thing to put out there. It doesn't give you the mechanics of sort of X, Y, yields and all that sort of jazz. What it does, it sets out frameworks for valuations and sort of how reports ought to be laid out, what terms of engagement need to be, etc. But what it does do quite neatly, it's 418 pages long. Now you can download it. Don't read it all because it's horrendously dull. And there are a wide range of sort of subsections to it, things like arts and antiquities, asset valuations, etc. If you're doing international shares transactions, there's all that sort of stuff in, which is obviously hyper-specific. The nice thing is, what it does do within both the Red Book and the International Valuation Standards, which are sort of appended to it, it gives you a very, very detailed breakdown of that definition. And I urge everybody who works with me, etc., to read that and understand the conceptual framework behind it. Because basically, each part is broken down Okay, so it will tell you what we think as valuers and how we are to approach the phrasing of this bit without compulsion. Okay, it will tell you what constitutes proper marketing. Now, for example, the proper marketing of a 2-up, 2-down terraced house in inner city Birmingham is different to a shopping centre. Yeah, do you get that? So the length of time it's on the market, where you might advertise it, etc., etc. No one property has got, no two properties have got an identical definition of what constitutes proper marketing. It's all horses for courses. Okay. Read, understand, and be familiar with that, because when you have a valuation done for a mortgage, that's how the valuer's approaching it. Okay, that is the primary sort of thing that the bank wants from us as valuers. Now, there are other things within that the banks may want, such as things called special assumptions, which I'm not covering today. But a special assumption that you probably are all familiar with, or at least people who have had mortgages in the past, will be something like a restricted marketing period of 90 or 180 days. Yeah, everyone sort of heard of that? So you say, right, okay, well, what's the market value subject to a special assumption that the property has to be sold within 90 days, and that will inevitably lower the price, or 180 days. Now, big thing to sort of word of caution is when you are going for a mortgage and you are speaking to your broker, make sure that your broker understands, and I'm sure I don't know how many brokers there are in the room here today, but make sure they are all brilliant and fully understand what the bank lend against. It's a question I always ask whenever I go for a mortgage, and you ought to be asking, or your broker really ought to be knowing and asking and understanding what the bank lend against. So, little quick example before we move on. I'm starting to refinance part of my commercial portfolio at the minute. Went to Barclays, and they said, oh yeah, we do a loan at 50% loan to value, and it's at 2% over base rate, which for commercial is phenomenal. However, I knew to ask the question before we even went down the road, okay, well, what value do you lend against? They said, right, it's vacant possession value. What that means, so my commercial properties are industrial multi-let estates. The market value, as defined, is X, but the market value with vacant possession just assumes that all the properties are completely vacant and we're not receiving any rental income. That vacant possession value is probably about 15% lower.
So the bank doesn't value your tenancies?
They will value it, they won't lend against it.
Because they do worst case scenario if you're
Yeah. Now, that's Barclays for certain loan sizes on certain assets. Okay, banks have different tranches of money for different things. They will say, okay, if you want to borrow this amount of money, this is the product, or these are the products. Another, Cambridge and Counties, who we're with, they will lend up to 65% on market value. So very different things. Make sure you understand. Now, the amount of people I've had come back to me or come to me or whatever and say, oh, I've had this valuation done, and it turns out that the bank are only willing to lend 70% of the 90-day figure. It's like, right, okay, well, why didn't your broker tell you that, or why weren't you understanding of that from the outset? Now, if the bank changed their policy, a bit different, but just things you need to be asking as a borrower, because inevitably it comes back to us, and most of the time borrowers don't get to see our valuation reports. And so if you just get told, oh, we have valued the property at 300 grand and I was expecting 350, it's like, well, we may have valued it at 350, but the bank are only willing to lend off 300, which may be, for example, the 90-day figure, or the 180-day figure, or the vacant possession figure, or any combination of those. Okay?
That's just clear the balloon shooting my head, that has. It's clear the ballown stuff in my head,
I stand here to serve. Okay. There is a nigh on identical definition of market rent, which unfortunately is sort of smudged up on this screen. Again, not necessarily massively important when it comes to secured lending and valuations, but equally worth looking through. Right. A massively, in fact, predominantly important thing when you're doing property deals. And indeed, basically, what I tend to try and tell clients and what have you is, you must always, to one degree or another, be trying to think like a surveyor, like a valuer. Unless you're just absolutely cash rich and you have no intention whatsoever of getting a mortgage, and in which case that's awesome. But for sort of the 99% of real people, you are probably going to be debt driven to one degree or another. Okay, and we as surveyors and valuers are absolutely required to put and include and use comparable evidence in our valuation reports. Okay, it's mandatory under the Red Book. Okay, so this is what's called a professional standard. It's the comparable evidence in real estate valuation. Again, you can download it from the internet. Just to explain, the RICS, the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. Does anyone know the difference between an institute and an institution? Yes.
Is this true when you're chartered, like surveyors have to be chartered whether it's commercial or they're building?
No, the RICS is an institution, so I'm a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. Yeah, what's the difference between an institute and an institution?
Institutions, do they not need to be CPD accredited?
No. An institution is for the benefit of the public. An institute is for the benefit of its members. So that's why all these documents are available to download for members of the public, because the RICS has a royal charter, and therefore we have to act as in the public interest, in the public benefit. And that's why members of the public are able to obtain them. So you can get the Red Book, you can get the comparable evidence in real estate valuation, you can get the new build home professional standard. There's about 50 of those professional standards. If you're interested in pubs and hotels, etc., there is a professional standard pertaining to that. Now, these documents, not necessarily this one specifically, but they do go through the mechanics to one degree or another of valuation, the number crunching, etc., the nuts and bolts of it. Not explicitly, because a lot of it is covered in academic textbooks, but to a larger degree, or again, like I said before, the Red Book itself doesn't, almost exclusively doesn't. These do. Okay. So if there's any element of property specifics that you're interested in, I would suggest that you go onto the RICS website and just put it in, professional standards, and see if that sort of trudges anything up. Because again, if you're wanting to get into that area, or you are in that area and you want a specific question answering, think like a valuer, think how we think, and your answers and estimates will probably be, hopefully, be more along the right lines, and you will benefit yourself. All right? So, comparables are massively important. We are required to sort of use comparables, evidence, to justify our valuation. So, what I always recommend to clients is, first and foremost, if the clicker works, this question always comes up. What happens if I'm buying a property? HMOs is the classic, okay? What happens if I'm wanting to buy an HMO or turn a property into an HMO and there are no comparables to justify my end GDV?
Buy it.
Yeah. There we go. It's almost a double act. Yeah. Yeah. There is no exception to this rule. I cannot stress it enough. Jokes aside, laughing and joviality aside, there is absolutely no exception to this absolute fucking rule. Right? If you cannot find comparable evidence, and it's mainly investment, again, thinking about it in HMOs, because it's sort of what most people have done or are very familiar with. a lot of people will say, oh, well, you know, I'm wanting to get this HMO and sort of turn, you know, it's in an Article 4 area and, you know, it's got a license and it's 7 bedrooms, so I've got a plan in and blah, blah, blah. It's like, right, that's all fantastic. Is there any evidence of transacted, completed HMO investments? No. Don't buy it. Okay? Anything that you do, if you are working in a debt-driven environment, i.e. mortgages, you must have the evidence to back up the valuation that you are expecting. It is absolutely mandatory. We, as valuers, cannot just pick a figure out of the air. And as rational as that figure may be, we cannot just pick a figure out of the air. It must be backed up by evidence.
How close should it be to the property? 0.25.
Right, so there's two answers to that, and it very much depends. If the whole sort of quarter or half of a mile thing is very, very, and the chap behind you is a broker, or your broker will be able to hopefully back me up, he says, through his gritted teeth, please. A lot of it is driven by the bank's lending requirements. So sometimes banks mandate it's got to, well, they don't say it absolutely has to be, because they usually say is it ought to be, but it's valuer's discretion. that's always the big sort of loose catch-all caveat at the end. If it's a traditional 2 up, 2 down, city centre, and it's a vanilla buy-to-let, yeah, you're going to sort of be quarter or half a mile, you know, and the comparables have to be within 10%, 15% of value range, or if you're doing like a help to buy redemption or any of that sort of jazz. If you're buying a shopping centre, not many of those for sale within a quarter mile, are there? So again, horses for courses. My investments, which I'll talk about later, I generally do quote unquote the north of England. So anything from Birmingham up to the Hadrian's Wall. That's sort of my general radius on the stuff of my personal stuff. HMOs, I would typically say, Birmingham's obviously a very big city, so on Birmingham, if you've got something, you know, west of the city centre, it might be tempted to say, try stick to the west of Birmingham city centre wherever possible. Sheffield, you know, I would be, you know, it's a slightly smaller city, I'd just say within the Article 4 area of Sheffield city centre, if that's what you're doing. So yeah, that question, it's by and large down to valuer's discretion, you know, and some banks, most banks, for the smaller stuff, the more simple stuff, will say, oh, well, we kind of expect it to be quarter of a mile, that sort of thing, in terms of geography, chronological dates, etc. All right. Okay. Any questions on comparables before we move on to yields and sort of?
No comparables. How do you find them?
Well, by and large, we'll just cover our ass. So you sort of, we'll find some comparables maybe from neighbouring towns, or, you know, you just keep going area-wise until you do find something, and then you say, and then you just cover your ass. And the reason we do that is because if you're wanting to pay back investors, which is, you know, or, you know, a bridging loan or whatever, we kind of don't care, putting it bluntly, as valuers, because when we do a secured lending loan, we're on the hook for 6 years. Okay, we take liability for 6 years from the date of valuation. So if your investment goes wrong in the next 6 years because interest rates go up and you default on your mortgage, or you get divorced and blah blah blah, the bank will come back to us just straight up. It's what it happened a lot in 2009, 10, 11. The things called confetti claims, where as soon as a borrower defaulted, the banks just instantly professional negligence claim. Instantly, without question, whether they thought the valuation was right, wrong, up, down, left, or right, professional indemnity claim. And they were just after the fact called confetti claims, because they were just, you know, throwing them around. And they can be scary, you know, when you do get a claim on negligence. Even if you are absolutely bang to rights on your valuation, as soon as somebody says you're wrong, you think, oh shit, you know, and then your premiums go up, etc. So we as valuers are not going to do you guys any favours. You shouldn't expect favours. You should expect to have done the homework yourself up front and be absolutely solid on your own numbers, and that's got to be backed up by the evidence. Yeah.
Yeah, can you switch the lens that you look at your comparables depending on the financing product you're going for, such as bricks and mortar versus commercial valuation or sui generis or perhaps even room income? Can you do that?
So if we're talking about HMOs, which I'm assuming you are, there is a professional standard relating to valuation of buy-to-lets and HMOs, which I would urge you to read in that instance. And that will, again, guide you, because it guides us, as to what path you go down. Okay, you want to be looking at sort of section 4.6, I think, is the relevant section of that. A lot of it is preamble and guff and rubbish. But that talks about the valuation of buy-to-lets, HMOs and blocks of flats. Okay, so I think section 4.6 relates to the sort of the different flavours, if you will, of HMOs.